The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Eye Test, brought to you by Belly Up Media. I'm here with Bobby Amendola, and today we are putting more players into the Fantasy Doghouse. You can see the two that we put into the Fantasy Doghouse in yesterday's episode when we were handing out Week 2 Fantasy Awards. But today we're going to be throwing some more players in there, players that we are just not happy with, not talking to, giving them the silent treatment. And we are also allowing a couple players to get on probation. And we can talk about those players right now, Bob. We did have some players that really improved from week 1. Players like Josh Allen, DeAndre Swift, he looked great. He actually won our Most Improved Player Award in yesterday's episode. Jalen Hurts looking like a top 3 quarterback. Lamar Jackson looking like a top 5. Terry McLaurin is looking like maybe he's recovering from that turf toe injury and not getting beaten out by Jahan Dotson. Then we got DJ Moore. We got Drake London. T. Higgins is swapping hands with another Bengal today. Rachaad White, Paul would be super proud of. Unfortunately, he's on vacation this week. I wish that he could be here to talk about him because Rashaad's schedules is looking pretty tough. He may be back in before Paul even gets back. And then we got Christian Kirk and the Seattle Seahawks defense. They put up double digits this week. So congratulations to those players. They're on the Fantasy Probationary Portal. All they have to do to get free, Bob, is perform this good or, as good as they're projected to be, and they don't have to go back into the doghouse. But if they do underperform rather, they're going right back into the fantasy doghouse.
Yes, they are. It's going to get very interesting. It's going to get very interesting once people get out of the doghouse and then a week later they're back in the doghouse because they had a terrible game.
And it's going to help you viewers here that are watching on YouTube, which if you are, you can go ahead and subscribe to our channel. But it is going to help you guys out because you can start to track the inconsistencies and consistencies of these players here. So this is a fun type of episode that we're doing, but it is also very helpful. So we appreciate any likes or shares to this video as you view it. We appreciate it a lot. Let's head on over to
the doghouse.
Fantasy Doghouse.
The doghouse.
So right now you're seeing 3 players in here already. Justin Fields is automatically in because he was in here last week and he's staying in. If you remember from last week, DeAndre Swift got a free ticket to the doghouse. He is obviously on the probationary portal now. But the other 2 players that we have coming in, we got Jamar Chase tagging out T. Higgins. He's taking his spot. He's like, thanks for making your bed, T. And then we got Khalil Herbert. So you can go back to our episode from yesterday when we were handing out Week 2 Fantasy Awards. Jamar Chase and Khalil Herbert, they got those free tickets to join Justin Fields, who got a free ticket after Week 1. Now, Bob, let's start talking about the other players that are also staying in.
All right. So last week, T. Higgins was bunking with Joe Burrow, and this week Jamar Chase is bunking with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow stays in the fantasy doghouse this week. He had a much better week this week compared to his week 1. He put up 16 points, but he just hasn't looked like the typical Joe Burrow that we're used to. And he was being drafted in, as a top 5 quarterback. And I think when you're drafting a top 5 quarterback, you're expecting, at a bare minimum 18 points, but you're likely expecting 20 plus points. And Joe Burrow hasn't cracked that number yet. He's averaging like 150 passing yards a game through the first 2 weeks. And that's just not good enough for a top 5 quarterback or a guy that was being drafted as a top 5 quarterback. So he stays in the fantasy doghouse through week 2, which I don't think a lot of people would or were expecting.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And this guy, I don't think we were expecting either. George Kittle is staying in.
Yeah.
He cannot escape. Lots of, I guess, positive performers on the Niners. Brock Purdy included in that. CMC, obviously. And then Debo and Ayuk are looking okay. I mean, But George Kittle, he's getting low volume for a top 5 projected tight end, highly drafted. He's one of those guys that we are saying, if you're not getting Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, there's really no point in getting a tight end in like the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. And a lot of people made that mistake drafting George Kittle, and they are suffering from the consequences here. George Kittle, 3 catches, 30 yards, not good enough to get on probation.
Yeah, another surprising guy because he had a lot of really good numbers with Brock Purdy last year. So maybe it's just he just needs a little bit more time for some regression to the mean, but definitely not what people are expecting. Another
And
tight end.
real quick, Bob,
Oh
real
yeah.
quick. He is going against the Giants next week, so I'm expecting Kittle to dominate. Actually, it's going to be tonight. He's going against the Giants, so he is totally going to get out of the doghouse.
Yeah. Yeah, if he's going to do it, it should be next week. And this is another guy, another tight end that was being drafted pretty high as well, and that's Dallas Goedert. This guy was really, really good last season, and people were drafting him as if he was going to be just as good as he was last season. And what has it gotten them so far? It's gotten them a goose egg and a 5-point performance in, or actually a little bit
8,
more in.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's in full PPR. I'm looking at half PPR numbers right
Okay.
now. But he had 6 catches for 22 yards and an abysmal 3.67 yards per catch. And this is a guy that was Jalen Hurts' favorite target in the red zone last year before he got hurt. And now it just seems like the Eagles are starting to transition to, Devontae Smith more and AJ Brown, obviously, as well. So, it's still too early to say, but it may be that, Dallas Goedert may just not be what he was last year with the amount of mouths that there are to feed in the Eagles offense. And they're going up against the Tampa defense next week. I think Dallas Goedert is probably going to stay in the doghouse, and it's going to be hard for him to get out unless he just looks like he's going to be a touchdown dependent guy this season if he's not getting, more air yards.
Yeah, it's always super hard to predict with the Eagles offense and all those mouths to feed. I will say if there's an injury to Devontae Smith or AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert can now become that second preferred target, I think that's when we can really start to expect him to enter probationary and possibly become a free man. Yeah, Tampa Bay, man, their defense is good. They're really good against running backs, so maybe that'll force Eagles to throw more. We'll see how they adapt. But I'm gonna go ahead and talk about Najee Harris.
Oh
This
my
guy and everyone,
God.
he was a 2nd and 3rd round draft pick across fantasy this year, and he is like putting up week 1 DeAndre Swift numbers: 10 attempts, 43 yards, and 3 targets for 1 reception and 0 yards. I mean, it is not looking good for the Steelers. And honestly, Paul predicted it, and I agreed with him last week. He was predicting Najee to get out onto probation because it was like a divisional rival. Usually that's like hard-nosed football, running the ball, close game, got to mix it up between passing and running. And Najee is looking like he's losing his job to Jalen Warren, Bob.
Yeah, I agree. I think at this point, a lot of people are holding out hope that he's just going to return to the Najee Harris that he was his rookie year. But frankly, he wasn't even that good running the ball in his rookie year. The reason he was so good is because he was catching like 8 passes a game from washed up Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
And he's clearly not doing that with Kenny Pickett now. So, a guy that was going in the 2nd or 3rd round, he's looking like a bust at this point, and I don't think he's going to get out of the doghouse, especially next week going up against Buffalo.
He's going against the Raiders,
Oh,
actually.
excuse me, I was looking at the wrong player.
That's okay. Yeah, he's going against the Raiders. So you bring up a good point. The Raiders defense is not good. So if there is a chance for Najee to redeem himself, he's got the Raiders and then Houston. He's got a chance to be a free man over the next 2 weeks. Unfortunately, he goes up against Baltimore in that 3rd week, so he could find himself back in before the bye week.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I'm not holding out faith on him. It's looking pretty rough. It's looking like how it did last year. and people were kind of hoping that since he started performing well towards the end of the year, he's going to carry that into this season, and it just hasn't happened yet. When you're putting up 5 points in full PPR as a second or third round draft pick, it's
not good.
terrible. It's terrible.
All right, who we got next?
We got Antonio Gibson, guy that is staying in the doghouse again. And unlike some of these other guys that we've been talking about, he wasn't drafted terribly high, but he did have expectations. And it just looks like it's Brian Robinson's job now, frankly. He only had 3 catches this week. He did have 44 yards, so I'll give him that. He did much better than he did in week 1, where he only put up 1.4 points. But again, it's just looking like Brian Robinson's offense. And Antonio Gibson is kind of an afterthought when we thought that he would be the guy catching passes out of the backfield in Eric Bieniemy's offense, and it just hasn't happened yet. And this is the guy that's playing Buffalo next week, and I don't think it's going to happen against Buffalo.
Yeah, no, he is losing that job to Brian Robinson. I think Brian Robinson could probably beat out Kyle Pitts for his job even. Kyle Pitts is just so bad. We continue to get played by him every year. We think it's his year. And I mean, dude, you're putting up an average of 4.5 points over the last 2 weeks. One of those, the first week, was against Carolina's defense. And it's like, how are you not getting involved? He's getting 3 targets, 5 targets, catching 2 balls each game, yards per 7 yards per catch. Okay, that's not bad, but it's like you're only catching it twice. Like the Falcons offense, besides Bijan Robinson and I guess Tyler Algier, is really, really bad. Drake London is showing signs of improvement, I guess, but it's just not looking good for Kyle Pitts. And I don't know what his problem is. Like, I need to just solely watch the Falcons, I think, and just watch Kyle Pitts. Like, what is wrong with him? Is Desmond Ridder not throwing him catchable balls? Is he not a good route runner as we thought he was? Because that's what we all thought he was great at, was he's a smaller wide receiver. And Dalton Kincaid already looks better than him.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely the Arthur Smith offense, but it seems to be specifically tailored to slighting Kyle Pitts for whatever reason. And maybe he's just not as good as we thought he, was coming out of college. But this is a consistent pattern now. We're in year 3 of Kyle Pitts, unless he's going to another team, which he's probably not, then he just is what he is at this point. Just for Kyle Pitts to get out of the doghouse, we really only need to see maybe 10 points. We're like, okay, he could be put on probation, but he's just not even coming close to that, where it's like there's no consideration at all. He feels like a season-long doghouse guy, besides for maybe a random week we'll have a touchdown and it'll push him to maybe 12 points.
Yeah, and there's no point in playing the matchup game with Kyle Pitts. It doesn't matter if he's going against a green defense or a defense that gives up a lot of points at tight ends. At this point, he is a benchable tight end. You should not be starting Kyle Pitts. I don't care if he's going up against the Lions next week.
He's honestly, besides for name recognition, I'm just going to say it, he's borderline droppable, at this point.
He is. That's what it is. People won't drop him, though, because they don't want to show that they're, wrong. But, he is pointless on your bench. There's waiver wire tight ends that are putting up better numbers than him.
Yeah, go get Hunter Henry. Unless you're in Dynasty, Kyle Pitts is pretty much useless in redraft leagues until otherwise proven. Obviously, people won't drop him because of the name recognition and everything, but he's not putting up any points, and he hasn't shown that he could really put up points in his 3-year career yet. So, we'll see what happens. But moving on to another guy that is staying in the doghouse, Josh Jacobs, another guy that was drafted extremely high after his career year last season, but it's a career year for a reason. And he's looking like a bust at this point. Only 2 weeks in, obviously, and he's probably knocking off some rust after the mini holdout that he had, but he has not looked good at all. Hasn't eclipsed 10 points either in either of his games, and he is getting the opportunities. He's played 80% of the snaps in week 1. He played 73% of the snaps in week 2. the yards per carry are just horrible. In week 1, 2.5. This past week, it was negative. It's really bad for Josh Jacobs right now. And although he did catch 5 passes this week, it wasn't enough to really make him have a relevant fantasy day. And I would be concerned right now if I was a Josh Jacobs owner. And it doesn't get any easier for him. They're going up against the Pittsburgh defense next week, and I just think he's going to have a tough time as well next week. And, what is the standard for him getting out of the doghouse? I would like to see, a 15-point game. Can he get 15? Sure. Do I think he's going to? I don't. I think he's going to be in the doghouse after week 3.
Wow. That's not going to be good. I mean, people were spending high draft capital on him. Oh, that will not be good.
Yeah,
Let's talk about – go ahead.
No, I was just like, they're projecting him right now. Maybe it'll change as it gets closer to the game, but they're projecting him for an 11 and a half points right now. And
embarrassing.
That's a far cry from where everyone thought he was going to be. So again, maybe it's just some rust, but when you're trying to win and try and compete for a playoff spot, your likely second round pick, not touching 10 points yet is, a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about Kadarius Toney here. We were saying that he's gonna be in all year long, Bob, and I'm just saying.
It was close. It was close.
Yeah, it was close. He scored 8 points, which is so funny that we're expecting that to be good. But to some teams, he is a flex play. Maybe not in week 2 after that week 1 performance, but you did see him catching all of his passes, which was the main reason we threw him into the doghouse, because he was a reason that the Chiefs lost in week 1 for not catching the ball. Easy balls too. So he went 5 for 5 for 35 yards, nothing crazy. And of course he had to fumble the ball. So he stays in. However, if he continues this uphill improvement, he does have the Bears in week 3. So I'm just saying, if it's any week that we can see Kadarius Toney get into probation, it's this week. He may have to enter a plea deal to be put out on good behavior. If he can put up 10 points, I think I may give him a pass based on good behavior.
I think Kadarius Toney, if he can get 10 points, deserves to be in the probationary portal, because he's not one of these guys, some of these guys that we've named so far, that had massive expectations. If you're starting Kadarius Toney and you get 10 points, you're probably pretty happy with that.
Yeah, because you're probably dealing with a lot of injuries right now.
Yeah.
You probably had Chubb, Rodgers, and J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah.
And you're like, I guess I got to start Kadarius Toney this week.
Yeah, and if you were really relying on Kadarius Toney to be a significant piece of your fantasy team, then you probably already lost.
Yeah. Right, exactly. All right, so then we've got another guy staying in here is Cam Akers. What is going on with Cam Akers? This happened.
Yikes.
It is. It's the yikes, Cam Akers. Yeah, it's just not good, dude. This happened last year too, where week 1 he wasn't even utilized, versus this year he was, and he sucked. Thankfully, he got 1 touchdown, so he didn't have 2 points. But I mean, healthy scratch week 2, Bob. And it looks like they're going to trade him yet again. I mean, this happened all last year where he was in the doghouse in real life with Sean McVay. And now he is in the doghouse again with us and with the Rams, and he's probably going to get traded. And honestly, I hope that he can be good somewhere else, because I was pretty high on him this offseason. Not high enough to get any shares of him, which I am now thankful for. But yeah, it's not even worth projecting what his matchup looks like. I mean, they're going against the Bengals, but I don't think he's going to play. He's probably going to get traded before week 5 or something like that. So I would hold on to Cam Akers, especially in dynasty leagues, because really in both, don't drop him yet. See where he gets traded first, because it's going to happen in the next month. So just hold on to Cam Akers, bench him, and you'll thank yourself later if he lands on a team with a lot of opportunity. And then now we're going into who's entering, Bob.
Who's entering?
Alexander Madison is coming in. Welcome in, Alexander. Spread your cheeks. Cough twice.
Alexander Madison, a guy, you know, a guy people were so excited about. We talked about the Madison Tingle last year when we were first getting started, because when he replaced Dalvin Cook, when Dalvin Cook was injured, sometimes he played pretty well. But through 2 weeks of him being the workhorse back in Minnesota, the results haven't been great. This past week, he only didn't even put up 5 points. His yards per carry is really bad. It's below 4. And honestly, if he didn't have a touchdown in week 1, he would have had another game where it was just 5 points. He's been extremely inefficient. Granted, they haven't given him the ball that much. He only doesn't even have 20 carries through 2 weeks. But even in the passing game, where supposedly he was supposed to thrive and everything like that, his yards per catch is really bad. Again, another one that's below 4. And he wasn't going like terribly high where it could potentially cost you, the season, but he was going in like the 5th, 6th round where you're like, okay, if I draft him as my RB2, I feel pretty good. And he's the RB35 right now through 2 weeks. So welcome in Alexander Madison. I think you have a good chance to get out next week against the Chargers. Their defense really hasn't been that good so far, and they're known for being bad against the run. So the chances there, I just don't know if they're going to give him the volume. It doesn't seem like they want him to be, it just seems like they just want Kirk Cousins to be slinging the rock all game, honestly. They clearly don't have as much faith in him as we were led to believe, going into the season.
And it kind of makes sense because if they did have a lot of faith in him, they would have turned this Dalvin Cook and Madison duo into like an actual committee, but they never did. So if you look back, you see all those red flags. There was no reason to think that Madison can handle a bell cow role. Dameon Pierce, Bob, another guy who's entering in, he was like a 4th or 5th round player this year, drafted in fantasy leagues, and he's not putting up those types of numbers. So let's talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, I'm very tired although I think this principle does apply in a lot of situations across fantasy, I'm tired of hearing the volume excuse for Dameon Pierce. I don't think Dameon Pierce is that good. He had a couple good games last year, and maybe he turns it around this year, but he's gotten 26 carries through the first 2 games, and he's barely averaging, 3 yards a carry, which is really bad for a guy that's getting that type of volume. He's not involved a lot in the passing game. He has barely touched 5 points through the first 2 weeks in each game. And honestly, after this week, it's looking like the CJ Stroud show in that passing game now with Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and what's the other guy? They got Mechie there, and they got Dalton Schultz.
I mean, they got Dalton Schultz. He hasn't been doing much, but yeah.
But it just doesn't – I just don't think the stars are going to align for Dameon Pierce this year. And again, what are we expecting for him to get out of the doghouse? That's what the question is. That's what we want to answer. Again, I think the line is probably like, 10, 11 points. We're like, okay, I think he could probably get out now. But I just don't think he's going to be a relevant option for the year. If you're relying on him to be your RB2, I think you're going to be more disappointed than not throughout the course of the season, especially if CJ Stroud continues to excel, especially with how he was this week.
Yeah, I mean, if Dameon Pierce's only hope is if they're going to rely on CJ Stroud to pass the ball, then hopefully it's to Dameon Pierce and he can get involved into that passing game. But it's just not looking like that at all. How about Isaiah Pacheco, Bob? Another guy that kind of reminds me of like the Dameon Pierce theory, where it's like, you had flashes and then all of a sudden you're being looked at as like an RB2. When in reality, you were a flex player the whole entire time and riding the bench more often than not. You were a fill-in flex for when there were injuries. That's what you were. And that's what Pacheco, that's what Dameon Pierce are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A common theme among these 3 running backs that we've talked about that are now entering the doghouse is that they're pretty much touchdown dependent, and in Pacheco's case, he's in a Patrick Mahomes led offense. And we know Patrick Mahomes is airing out the ball. He's not handing the ball off a ton. I'm actually surprised Pacheco got 12 carries this past week, and he actually was pretty productive with them. It just didn't really translate into anything. He only got carries, didn't get any targets or anything like that. Finished with like 7.5 points. 5.83 yards a carry. It's good. It looks good, but it doesn't really translate to fantasy success. And I think, if you're starting Pacheco, if you're in that unfortunate situation, you just are really hoping that he could get a touchdown and then put you in that like 12-point range. So
Yeah, and he is
again,
going against the Chicago Bears this week. So I am starting
yeah,
Pacheco. I'm
never
giving
mind.
it
He's out of the doghouse this week. He's
I'm
out of the doghouse
I'm
this
giving
week.
him one more week starting on my roster. If he can do well against the Chicago Bears and help me win, I'm happy about it. But then he's got the Jets. Then he goes back to Minnesota, Denver. So like he does have some promise where he could be going back and forth between the doghouse and the probationary portal. But we'll see with Pacheco. Up next, Bob, we've got AJ Dillon, and I mean, we thought that he could do well
Yikes.
volume wise because Aaron Jones was out, but I guess that's not the case for AJ Dillon.
No, the theme is running backs right now for all the guys
Yeah.
entering the doghouse. And, AJ Dillon over the course of the past couple years as Aaron Jones's backup has been a good fill-in, but
Hmm.
he finds himself in the doghouse now. Just wasn't good this week. Got 15 carries, but less than 4 yards a carry, which I sound kind of repetitive saying that, but that's pretty much the benchmark, like the bare minimum of what you want from a running back, to be achieving. And he just didn't do it this week, and he wasn't involved in the passing game enough, which doesn't. Oh well, he's not really known for that. That's more Aaron Jones. So
He had a couple games last year where him and Aaron Jones were receiving, but that was with Aaron Rodgers. So
mhm. Yeah, I don't know. Jordan Love seems to really like, even with Christian Watson not playing, seems to really like, his wide receivers and
yeah,
his tight ends. And it's just didn't happen for AJ Dillon this week. Finds himself in the doghouse. He has New Orleans. That's a very tough matchup next week. I'm not sure the status of Aaron Jones right now, but if Aaron Jones comes back, AJ Dillon's probably going to be in the doghouse all season long unless he gets, a random touchdown when Matt LaFleur decides, oh, I'm going to vulture Aaron Jones today.
yep, exactly. And honestly, if Aaron Jones was playing in week 2 and AJ Dillon performed how he did, I'm not sure I would have thrown him in the doghouse. But
No.
because Aaron Jones was out, AJ Dillon, so it's a bad week for AJ Dillon to join because now he's in the doghouse. And like you said, if Aaron Jones comes back, it's going to be very, very hard for AJ Dillon to get
Yeah,
out.
and there's no excuse. Like just because a player comes back, you don't get to just leave the
Oh yeah,
doghouse.
no.
It's only
All right.
performance that gets you out of the doghouse.
Exactly. All right, we got 3 players left, Bob. We're going to talk about Jahan Dotson real quick. It's been 2 weeks now and no signs of him breaking out, which plenty of us expected, and a lot of us were thinking that, Dotson is the better value receiver in terms of reaching on McLaurin, similar to like a Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel type of deal where it was like just get Dotson, it'll be okay. Like we're kind of learning that that may not be the case. Dotson is only in his second year, so it would be nice to see some improvement. And I'm sure we're going to expect a breakout in year 3 as well, if that's the case. But as of now, Dotson is joining the bunk mates in the doghouse. I guess he's swapping out with Terry, so he's taking his spot. And yeah, not looking good for Dotson. As long as Terry McLaurin is there, I think he's still going to be scary Terry, and Jahan Dotson is going to be Jahan Dudson.
Dudson, I like that. I like that. Give quick shout out to Sam Howell. Sam Howell's been very good,
Yeah,
and I thought they've played 2 pretty mediocre defenses so far. So we'll see if he can continue his good play.
yeah. Now
But
they have Buffalo and Philly, so
yeah,
it's going to be tough for Dotson to get out.
yeah. So it's going to be tough. This is where we're going to find out if this Commanders offense is legit with Howell
Yeah,
under center now. But yeah, Dotson was a guy that people called him a sleeper, but it's not. You're not really a sleeper when everyone's talking about you. But again, only 2 weeks in. He's not a guy that I'm like super concerned about, as long as you're not relying heavily on him, as long as you didn't draft him as like your wide receiver too. He's a guy that, could come on later
Yeah.
in the season. I just don't think he'll be getting out of the doghouse this week against Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. And then up next, we got Jahmyr Gibbs.
And Gibbs,
Welcome in. I'm not happy about this,
I think
but it
it's a
needs to
little.
happen.
I think it again, it's the expectations thing. I think it does need to happen because, especially on fantasy Twitter and all the fantasy gurus, the dynasty gurus, were all over Gibbs this season. And in some leagues, depending on your PPR formats and whether it's half or full, he's been putting up double-digit points, but the usage really just hasn't been there yet. Week 1, 27% of the snaps, which was expected, but still. And this week, even with Montgomery going out, he played 48% of the snaps. The guy Craig Reynolds came in and they used him a decent amount. So yeah, this Dan Campbell just seems to like to use two backs, and I think this is what you're pretty much going to be getting with Gibbs all season long, and
Ooh.
unfortunately I do. He could have some boom games, but it looks like his floor is pretty safe. I will say that.
Yeah.
So I think, what is his standard for getting out of the doghouse? Because we're putting him in some leagues where he scored like 14 points.
Oh yeah. I mean, if Monco is out next week, Gibbs has to show out. I want to see 12, 13 points.
I think we
For a
need.
first round draft pick in, the NFL, I think that the expectations are still high. I think he's been given the benefit of the doubt because he's a rookie. They're working him in. But let's just not forget what Dan Campbell said, that we're going to be using him in mysterious ways or whatever.
I think
And I guess he was right. This is one of the most mysterious ways that I was expecting. I wasn't expecting him to get this little amount of points. So I
yeah,
guess he was kind of telling us that.
especially when you look at the other star rookie who has been living up to expectations, and hasn't even been used nearly as much as we thought he was going to yet, but he's been putting up 20 plus points
Yep.
so far. So Bijan looks amazing, and there were some people that were crazy enough to say that Gibbs was going to be better than Bijan this
That's just
year.
people who want to be right on like the craziest takes.
Yeah. So again, it's a little unfair because he has been decent so far, but with the expectations, Gibbs finds himself in the doghouse, and going up against Atlanta with Montgomery out, I think he has a good chance to get himself out if we could see, maybe an 18-point game.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's totally out if that's the case. All right, let's close this one out, Bob. Another one. I mean, the criteria is getting strict for these players. Let's end it with a quarterback, the only quarterback joining I guess Justin Fields and Joe Burrow in the fantasy doghouse, and that is Trevor Lawrence, who Paul said was going to be a league winner in 2023.
I think Paul said that I don't think he guaranteed that he was going to be QB1, but he said that he wouldn't be shocked if he would be QB1.
Yes.
And it's not looking like that so far. He's QB23 right now through 2 weeks. And with the addition of Calvin Ridley, and he's in his third year now, everyone expected him to take that huge leap. And again, it's only week 2, not hitting the panic button or anything, but he finds himself in the doghouse after a 10-point performance against the Kansas City Chiefs, who actually have a very good defense now. So let's not, get that twisted. It's not the Chiefs defense of past years that were Swiss cheese, but still, we were expecting a massive leap from Trevor Lawrence, and we just really haven't seen it yet. He was okay in week 1. He put up 18 points, but week 2 was god awful. 22 for 41, 216 yards, didn't even throw a touchdown pass. Basically got bullied by the Chiefs defense all week long. Thankfully, he does play in a division matchup, the Houston Texans next week, where I think he will get himself out of the doghouse.
Yeah.
And they're home as well, which will help.
Perfect. All right. So those guys are now in the doghouse. They're going to have to perform well twice in a row in order to become free. Again, if they perform well next week, then they will be put on the probationary portal. Next week, we're going to be going over who in the probationary portal is free, who in the probationary portal is going back in the doghouse, who from the doghouse is going to probationary portal, and much, much more. We appreciate everyone viewing in on YouTube. Go ahead, like this video, subscribe to our channel. Everyone listening on Apple and Spotify, we will talk to you next week. And that'll be for week 3. See you then. Peace.
Peace.